Welcome to the Michigan Early Literacy Collaborative Module. The standard presented in this PowerPoint will focus on RL.K.2. This is one part of the literature standards for kindergarten reading in the Common Core. Reading standards for literature. This module will provide ways to prompt and support readers by having them retell a story using important details from the story, to use a balanced literacy model in the classroom, to check for understanding through formative assessments, to understand the assessment cycle, and to integrate the standard in reading and writing instruction. This picture shows all of the anchor standards for kindergarten. All of them have equal value and must work together. Today we'll be working with the blue sprocket, which is the reading literature. A learning trajectory is a natural developmental progression in learning and development. Researchers have been identifying the learning trajectories in reading, spelling, mathematics, and even science. If teachers understand their trajectories, they can identify where students are and what their next levels are, and they can build much more effective lessons. The assessment cycle of testing and the information gathered at data reviews will drive your instruction through various things. How you teach this standard will depend on the time of year. You will build on these anchor standards by establishing your classroom routines and procedures. The curriculum we teach is driven by an assessment cycle. The data from the assessment drives our instruction, revises our strategies to move towards our goals and needs of children. Components of a balanced literacy program. A balanced literacy plan is most effective when children are given direct instructional support and a variety of daily reading and writing experiences that are needed in the complex process of becoming independent readers and writers. During the course of the week, we need to keep in mind these elements of the balanced literacy approach, where our core curriculum instruction are, our reading workshop, our writer's workshop, and working with words. So when we look at these components to create success in kindergarten, obviously, in that pink line, we are not going to be starting with 120 minutes of instructional time or given time for children. That is way too much to be expected. Again, when you're setting your procedures and routines, you're going to look at creating and building stamina. And over time, towards the end of the year, you might have 30 to 40 minutes in reading and 30 and 40 minutes in writing. But then again, depending on how you teach this, and what things you include in your classroom. But very important to keep a balanced literacy program in your classroom. When we look at goal setting is so important because we are driven by data and we all need to show AYP on every student. One way to do this is by setting goals. To have successful readers, you will need to be intentional about your teaching. More concerned with what and when you're teaching as much as how you teach this content. This is more than just a phonics program. This goal setting takes to heart a balanced literacy approach to your curriculum and daily instruction. The foundation begins with the concepts about print, your phonemic awareness, your phonics, your vocabulary, your fluency, and again, comprehension. All of these things are needed to have children become successful readers. When we look at scaffolding our learning, we're really looking at ways to help build connections for kids. When we look at ways to give them visuals, an anchor chart, story starters, visual organizers, modeling or acting out stories, all of these things help build their connections to the story. When we look at their ZPD, or their zone of proximal development, Vygotsky stated that, when we look at our ZPD, it's really the difference between what a learner can do without help and what he or she can do with help. So when we look at that target and that's that focus, we help children keep them in that target learning during the day. When we also look at multiple intelligences here, when we look at Howard Gardner's theory on multiple intelligences, it's really a guide for us to understand the way children learn and process information. When we look at all of these things with our ZPD, scaffolding our learning, and multiple intelligences, this is the way we truly differentiate in the classroom. Understanding the standard RL.K.2. Let's look at how the Common Core defines this. With prompting and support, identify characters, setting, and major events in a story. Through the process of oral storytelling, students apply elements of the story structure which facilitates their ability to compose their own writing text. Retelling and summarizing are active reading comprehension strategies that students can apply across content areas. What does the gradual release of responsibility model look and sound like? Dr. Douglas Fisher, a professor of language and literacy education at San Diego State University, states that students need to develop their expertise in all aspects of reading and writing. That includes oral language, phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. He also stated that skills of a teacher and how a teacher uses valuable instructional time matters. The gradual release of responsibility model of instruction requires that teachers shift from assuming all the I do's to we do, then you do. Now, this gradual release can occur over a day, a week, a month, or a year, but it's important to look at that trajectory and give yourself permission to help learn this and provide those opportunities in your classroom. Understanding the parts of the mini lesson in a workshop model. Here in the architecture of this lesson, you have four major components: your connection, your teach, your active engagement, and your link. Each part is an important process, and notice the time to teach this. A mini lesson is short and sweet, it's focused and concise. It's very important to understand what I'm teaching you today as far as this mini lesson goes is a cumulative process from over a week of shared reading. So it's very important that you understand this is one piece of that whole. Here's your connection. Begins with a specific reminder of previous learning. State your learning target. Readers, we can tell a story that we know using important details from the story. Connection. Readers, today we'll be retelling and acting out a familiar poem to our friends. When we retell a story or poem, we need to remember to include details for our audience. This helps to make connections. I like the pocket chart visible. I like to use the pocket chart. There's other bulletins. There's other things that you can use. There's a printout that I use to have in their reading folder so they can read that independently. And then we also look at putting this in their reading folders or their reading just right backs for them to retell and reread themselves. Now, your teaching point in modeling, you want to make sure you practice this poem whole group first, then place them in groups. Now, you can put them in groups of 3 or 4. You can put them in groups of 5. You can put them in groups of 10. This is your discretion. Note that the nursery rhyme invites movement and dramatic interpretation, allowing children to personalize meaning, build language concepts, and vocabulary. Here's your teach. Here the teacher modeler explains the precise teaching point by using a familiar text as you explain or show examples. The text here is in a pocket chart, and that's still familiar to them and showing the examples of what you expect. This is the I do part of the gradual release. Teach. Readers, today you'll be teaching your friends the poem we've learned this week by acting it out. We will be watching and listening for key details, which are the actions from the poem. Teaching point. Our focus today will be on retelling the poem to our friends in the audience. You will be in groups of 3. Again, this is your discretion, depending on how you want to put them together. You can keep the pocket chart available also for them to read and make sure they're noticing to make sure the sequence is correct. Students will need to watch and listen to learn. Guided practice, which is the we do. At this point, you've practiced this poem at least a dozen times. Now it's time to see what they've learned by applying this knowledge and retelling their poems to their friends. Active engagement. Here the readers try the teaching point through guided practice. Now it's your turn to try. Restate the teaching point here. This is the you do. Now the active engagement will include your classroom becoming active listeners and speakers while performing or retelling the poem. The focus will be on their retelling skills to the audience. You have a choice as to how many to place in your group or groups. Encourage all children to participate. Designate an area for retelling performance and an area for safe transitions from one group to the next. And end your part or this area of active engagement by restating your teaching point as well. Here's your link. Here we set up children to transfer the teaching point to their independent reading and writing. So today, readers, we can tell a story or poem that we know using important details, just like you did today. We made connections to the text and words and used actions to retell the poem. To be a good reader, readers must retell familiar stories and include important key details. Now, there's an option here for them to go back to their seat and illustrate the poem. You can have them sequence the poem. You know, this is kind of their evidence as far as their learning. I keep this in their reading folders. You may also want something as evidence for their work samples to show proof that you've contacted or you've taught this standard. Skills needed. The lesson assumes that your students will have an understanding of two important classroom strategies. The first being to understand how to be a good listener and speaker and follow those directions. The second being to understand how to retell familiar stories that include key details. The verbs are those action words for them acting it out, and it's very important that you keep this mini lesson to 10 to 12 minutes. Your formative assessment piece is checking for understanding. You want to make sure you've planned, you notice and name the expectation, you've taught that skill. Your evidence is going to be during either that turn and talk. Here it's going to be the representation or retelling or acting out. Listen to their responses and help them to make the connection. When they're done, before you exit, do a quick check. This is a quick check of understanding I like to do with my fingers. 1, I don't get it, I need help. 2, I kind of get it, I need a little help. 3, I got it. 4, I got it, and I'm able to teach a friend. Again, this is linked to the standard that you've connected to at the beginning of this lesson. You'll, based on this information, revisit and revise as needed. Here are your anchor standards that are applicable to this lesson that I've put together for you today. Try to find ways to integrate these standards in your daily activities. If you're using the MESA units, it does this naturally through the course of each of the units. Multiple opportunities and exposure and our content standards promote success across the curriculum. Thank you for taking your time to listen to this module on literature for reading in kindergarten using stories. My hope is that you take this information and make this your own and apply these ideas to make your students become successful readers.